Hello and welcome. This interview is part of the series I'm doing to publicize a 2023 conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The conference is called CSICon, and it'll take place in Las Vegas this year from October 26th through the 29th. Today's guest is none other than Professor Richard Dawkins, who'll be giving a talk at CSICon this year. His description from the CSICon speaker site is short and sweet, so let me read that. Richard Dawkins is one of the most respected scientists in the world and is internationally a best-selling author. Among his books are The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, and his autobiography, A Brief Candle in the Dark. Although it's not mentioned there, Richard Dawkins is also a member of a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. So welcome and thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
And you just mentioned in a little pre-show, your next book is about to be released. What's the next book?
It's not coming out till 2024, but today is the deadline for handing it in. That's what I told you. Which is true.
Wow! And what is the name of this book?
It's called The Genetic Book of the Dead, and it is aimed at the same sort of audience of The Selfish Gene, as sort of intelligent lay people, and it's about 100,000 words. It's illustrated by Jana Lentsova, and that's it.
Looking forward to that. All right, so I want to read you a few other items from your very long Wikipedia page for people who may not know who you are. Dawkins' 76 book, The Selfish Gene, popularized the gene-centric view of evolution, as well as coining the ubiquitous term meme. He's well known for his criticisms of creationism and intelligent design, and as well as being a vocal atheist. Dawkins wrote The Blind Watchmaker in 1986, one of my favorites, and that argues against the existence of a supernatural creator. In 2006, you published The God Delusion, contending that a supernatural creator almost certainly does not exist and that religious faith is a delusion. And in 2006, you founded the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. Whether you're the only person I've ever interviewed that has a separate Wikipedia page just for your bibliography. 18 books alone, is that the right number that you've published?
Possibly, yes. I haven't counted.
That's incredible. Just about half of them are in science and biology, and many of them are in atheism. What do you see as
more than that, I think. Most of them on science.
What do you see as your most influential book?
I suppose The Selfish Gene and its sequel, The Extended Phenotype, which is aimed at a professional biological audience.
So what in your upbringing do you attribute to making you such a successful science communicator?
I don't know. I suppose I care about science. I mean, I passionately, I love science. I love the truth, and the scientific way of finding out the truth is exciting in its own right. The truth is exciting. I couldn't imagine doing anything else other than trying to promote science.
I interviewed Anne Dryan a few years ago, and we talked about the resistance that Carl Sagan, her late husband, had from the scientific establishment because he was a popularizer of science. I guess at the time it wasn't as valued as it is now. Have you ever had pushback on that front?
I am aware that it's actually called the Carl Sagan effect, that kind of, well, I think it amounts to jealousy. I don't think I've had pushback. I wouldn't know. I mean, people might not have told me. But I mean, I think Carl Sagan, for example, obviously should have been elected a fellow of the American Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences. I think he wasn't, and that's a scandal. I have been elected to the Royal Society, which is the British equivalent. And so I suppose that's an indicator that I didn't suffer from pushback.
So on your podcast, The Poetry of Reality, I recently saw you discussing the problems some people face when they decide to leave their religion, and that was very powerful. So before we talk about your CSICon talk, I want to tell you and the viewers that in my other job, I'm a volunteer for Recovering from Religion. And I often speak to people who have, have left religion or are trying to leave religion. And they say that their biggest influence was your writings, debates, or talks. It's amazing how often the God Delusion comes up.
Well, that's very nice to hear. I do get a lot of pushback about that, of course, from religious people, and about 20 books, I think, which have in their title something like like the Dawkins Delusion, or Deluded by Dawkins, or that kind of thing. So I think I seem to have hit them where it hurts most.
Yeah, so I have a Russian friend, Inga, who lives in Moscow, and she started out as a client of our organization, Recovering from Religion, dealing with her own trauma. She was in a cult. She was able to escape that and become a fellow Recovering from Religion volunteer. She helps other people now. So when she found out I was interviewing you, she was effusive over the impact you had on her life, and I encouraged her to write that out. And I want to read what she wrote, because I think it's probably representative of so many people who struggle to leave a religion. So Inga wrote, among all the books that I've ever read, those written by Richard Dawkins helped me the most in clearing my mind. They helped me straighten my thinking and understand the scientific approach to understand what is true. The language of his books is beautiful and they're easy to read. And at the same time, they're very thorough and precise. I enjoy being slowly and methodically guided step by step along the way of a story of scientific discovery. My mind becomes clear and the worries that come from the superstitions of our time disappear from me. Reading the God Delusion for the first time felt like coming home after a long and lonely journey. I want to express my deepest gratitude and appreciation to Professor Dawkins. So there you have it.
What a lovely statement. I love that. Please thank her very much for that.
I'm sure she'll
Funnily enough,
it.
Today I received in the post a book purporting to be an anthology of people who have been brought to religion by the God Delusion.
That is hard to believe. I have read it. And that is, that's a claim. I want to see a citation that proves that.
Yes.
I want to see the evidence for that.
Yes, me too.
Okay, so let's talk about your presentation at this year's CSICon. It's called Science, the Poetry of Reality, Jewel in Humanity's Crown. You're scheduled to do that on Thursday at 8:15 for an hour. You get an hour talk. Most people get a half hour. And here's you need definitely bring a glass of water up there. So here's a description of the talk from CSICon's website. The lecture will extol science as perhaps humanity's greatest and proudest achievement that invites accusations of scientism and arrogance. Science knows what it knows a lot, but it also humbly knows what it doesn't know also a lot. There may be questions too deep even for science, but if science can't answer them, no other human endeavor can either. Given that we were designed simply to survive and reproduce, the wonders that we have produced, the geniuses that we have, I have to ask you about that designed part. Science comes under attack from the fashionable belief that it is no more true than indigenous tribal myths and alternative subjective ways of knowing. These attacks are influential, but easily rebutted. Science has well-developed methods, for example, the double-blind trial, to eschew subjectivism. The human benefits of science need no listing, but they're not the main reason I would stand up for science as a sublime triumph of our species, up there with Shakespeare and Beethoven. We uniquely know how, where, and why we came into existence. So what else do you want to tell people about the talk besides what's in that description?
I noticed you hesitated over the word design. I've had an argument with Dan Dennett about this, and I came down on his side. I used to sort of put design in prominent quotation marks, and he uses the word design without apology. He says that it is designed by natural selection. Design does not have to mean deliberately designed.
Yeah, for sure. And I know why you said it. The thing that it troubles me a little bit when I see that in science writings, because I know that that's going to be taken, out of context by religious folks. See, he even believes in God designing.
Yes, that's true. Yes, but still, well, in Climbing Mount Improbable, I think it was, I coined the word designoid to mean sort of design, but not actually designed by a designer. And that's when Dan said it was not necessary, just call it design.
Yeah, that one catch on, like your coining of the term meme, that caught on for sure.
Yes, just designoid hasn't caught on, that's true.
No. So what else do you want to say about your talk?
Well, what can I say? I mean, it is an extolling of science. As I said, I think science is beautiful and wonderful, and it's an extraordinary privilege that we have to live in the in the 21st century when so much is known. And as I said, you have to, as you said in the summary, you have to admit there's a lot we don't know, but we should be proud of what we do know and be alert to how much we don't know, because it gives us something to work on. Science is sometimes accused of arrogance, and I think that's wrong. I think science is actually properly humble, because there's so much that we don't yet know, but we're working on it. Science is also comes under attack from various directions, that not only the religious direction, there's a kind of postmodern direction, which doesn't value objective reality at all, and which sees everything as subjective and a power play. That's as much as I can gather about what postmodernism is. It's very hard to get anybody to define what it is. Nobody seems to really know.
I'm on this team of editors we call the Guerrilla Skeptics in Wikipedia, and we promote science, fight pseudoscience, conspiracy theories on Wikipedia. And we had somebody join our team who was acting like, how do we know Reiki's not real? Why are you so sure homeopathy is false? And I go, what? So I looked at his Facebook page, and he declared himself as a postmodernist.
Okay, right. Well, in the case of homeopathy, I think we can say not only is it false, it has to be false, because if you think about doing an experiment, testing a homeopathic dose against a control as a double-blind trial, that cannot show a result because the two are identical. Well, they do have a get-out, which is they believe that water has a memory. And so even though there's not a single molecule left after all the succussion, all the successive dilution that they do, nevertheless, water remembers that it was once in contact with this molecule. Of course, it's been in contact with lots of other molecules as well. I mean, I think Ms. Lewis Walpert said that every time you drink a glass of water, you're imbibing at least one molecule that passed through the bladder of Oliver Cromwell. And not just him, but anybody's bladder for that matter. So homeopathy is obvious nonsense. And if postmodernism doesn't see that, then they're in trouble.
That's a good example. Homeopathy is like the lowest freaking hanging fruit there is. It's magic water. How have we as scientists, and in your case, and skeptics, as the people I work with, not been able to hammer this down yet? That people buy these products sold in pharmacies, for billions of dollars at their homeopathic hospitals in the UK. How is this possible? Why?
Well, if you talk to people, they will say, oh, but I tried homeopathy and it worked. I mean, they just don't realize how powerful the placebo effect is. They don't realize that they would have got better anyway, that most things get better anyway, all that kind of thing. I mean, just simply going to a doctor, even if the doctor gives you no medicine at all, just simply talking to an intelligent face who nods wisely and sort of consolingly, you get better. It's so easy to, it's so obvious, but yet I can understand when people, they would give them this course of homeopathic pills and they got better, and they thought, oh, miraculous, I got better. They don't think of doing the experiment of not taking the pills and see if they got better anyway.
Right. And I don't know about the products sold in the UK, but in the US, I noticed the fact that marketers know people think homeopathy is great, and they put the word homeopathic on things they sell that are not homeopathic. Like if you read the
no, that's even worse.
Yeah, it's herbal stuff, and herbs they can have an effect on you, good or bad. And so they'll put that on those kinds of products. So when I've talked to people about this, a lot of times, what do you got against homeopathy? It's just natural herbs and stuff. No, that's not what it is.
Oh, okay. No, they don't realize that it's ultra dilute.
That is correct.
Yeah. Dilute until there really is no molecule left.
Right. They don't. It's been conflated, and I think at least in the US on the products, I think that's intentional, because there's no definition of what you can put or not in that name, and therefore you could look at ingredients. On one hand, it might be actually homeopathic. It might be 50C, so there's nothing of the molecules that it's supposed to have in it at all, and it's relying on magic water. And on the other hand, you'll pick up something which actually has stuff in it and it still says homeopathic, and that's just not right.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so what are you most concerned about, the state of lack of understanding of science, and perhaps lack of trust in scientists that seems to be growing these days? Is it the medicine field that people get drawn to the wrong treatments, or is it beliefs in other things, like conspiracy theories, or is it religion?
I think, yes, conspiracy theories. I've been startled by looking at responses to articles I've written and things, that people will say things like, oh, well, I agree with you, but of course, you're all wrong about vaccines. Vaccines don't work. And there's been a tremendous backlash against vaccination because of the COVID case. I think that some of us may have been partly responsible for that by not realizing that the COVID vaccines, that the immune system, whereas in some cases it's absolutely clear that if you have a disease like, say, measles, you're not going to get it again. In the case of COVID, it's not clear that's true. You can get it again, and people do. It's just much less likely. And so in a way, people were led to expect too much from vaccination. They thought that the vaccination ought to be a total cure. And when it turns out to be a 90% immunization, they think, oh, it doesn't work because 90% is not 100%, but 90% is very, very good. And I think
surprisingly good for I think they were hoping to get 50 or 70% when they developed.
Exactly. Yes. So there's a lot of backlash against vaccines generally, and I think that's extremely unfortunate. I believe perhaps also we didn't sufficiently realize that the herd immunity point, the point about it being a public good, that you should get vaccinated even if you don't care about getting the disease yourself. You're being selfish if you don't get vaccinated because you become likely to carry it to other people. That is certainly true for, say, whooping cough and other diseases for which refraining from vaccination is an antisocial act. That may not be true, at least for some of the strains of COVID. And therefore, once again, we may have overplayed our hand in that respect.
I actually interviewed Paul Offord, and his interview will be out just before this. He's also speaking at CSICon, and he was, very instrumental in deciding which boosters got approved by the US FDA, for example. So it was a very, in-depth conversation about all this. And part of it is that the virus mutated so that the earlier strains seem to have been, held back by the vaccine, so that it wasn't as infectious. In other words, the vaccine was helping you become less likely to pass it on. And then it mutated, perhaps, is my understanding, that now that's not so much the case, but it still prevents, severe illness. So, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's certainly a good thing to get vaccinated. Definitely a good thing to get vaccinated. But it may not be an antisocial act not to get vaccinated to quite the same extent as it is with other
diseases, and like polio or things like that. Yes,
exactly. Yes.
Speaking of CSICon, one of the speakers from last year who I interviewed for this series just last month, Melanie Teresa King, told me she felt wronged for not winning a prize for her and her husband's fabulous pirate costumes, and is intent on correcting that slight this year. So she's a professor of biology and a huge fan of yours. And so naturally, she mentioned you in our interview, that she wants to get to talk to you this year. Well, I told her that you attended a past CSICon Halloween party in costume, and she took that as a challenge. So does Melanie need to worry? Are you going to be a competition for her to win?
No. I wore a butterfly collector's costume. I wore a pith helmet like a British Empire.
I remember.
This was all provided by Margaret Downey, who came equipped with enormous quantities of costume. She kitted everybody out, and I was just one of the people who benefited from her largesse in the way of costumes. So
I did not know that. That's a trivia fact. Interesting. Oh, but you picked a pertinent one having to do with biology, so that was very nice. too.
Yes.
Yes. So last year, I interviewed you just for a very short segment on the Skeptic Zone. I caught you at CSICon in the bookstore, and you were interested in recording that because it's an Australian podcast, because you were about to take a trip down under for a tour to Australia and New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, the Australia tour was fairly normal because I was interviewed by a different person at each of the main cities. But then New Zealand was especially interesting because I walked right into a controversy, and actually this is going to come into my lecture probably. The New Zealand government, under the present Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, when he was Minister of Education, he proposed a policy of education, which was to introduce to the science curriculum Maori ways of thinking.
Oh,
This has
so
been
this is
much
the whole
dealt
thing.
with
There's
by
Western science, and then there's like
that's right,
that
and
local science.
Jerry Collins' website has dealt with this a great deal. So I walked right into this, and I had lunch with about half a dozen people who were, I suppose, rebels, scientists who were rebels against the government policy, including a couple who were fellows of the New Zealand Royal Society, who had been censured by the New Zealand Royal Society because they'd written a letter protesting about the New Zealand government's policy, the policy of introducing Maori folklore, mythology, it amounts to mythology, into the science curriculum and giving it equal status to science, to what they call Western science, which of course is a misnomer. It's not Western science, it's just plain science. It's the science of humanity. It belongs to all humanity, and it is the way we know about the truth. Nothing wrong with teaching about Maori mythology in some other part of the education, but not in science. And so I made this point in my talk in Wellington and Auckland, I think, and was very warmly applauded by the audience. I got yelled at by one woman who then walked out. But it is a hot controversy in New Zealand at the moment. And I think those of us who love science and love New Zealand need to stand up and help to defend New Zealand science against this nonsense.
I'd love to continue this, but you mentioned that you're short on time today, so I want to be respectful of that, so we can end it here. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in Vegas this October.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to it too. Thank you very much.